So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on field landings. For those that don't know me, I'm an assistant instructor at Booker Gliding Club. I was asked to put this on, and then a few people said to me, oh, actually, I could really do with that briefing. So it's been thrown open to everybody. All welcome. This isn't my first webinar. I have set up a few polls and surveys, but I don't know if you can see them. I normally try and make my presentations and briefings a bit more interactive. Obviously, going online is making this a little bit harder. So please participate as best as you can. Landing out can be quite a high workload environment. It can be quite daunting the first couple of times you do it. The contra to that is everyone's got a good land out story, myself included. Pop them in the chat window. If you've had a couple of land outs, I can see there's a few people in here that have. We'll have a look at some of them at the end. We can have a bit of a chat and a giggle about them. I'm also going to do a Q&A at the end as well, because I've also found that button in here and it looks quite useful. There's also a link at the end of the presentation to a couple of resources as well, which are really good for follow-up reading. So if I do that one and that one. By the end of this presentation, by the time I'm finished, why we land in fields, how to prepare for it, what to look for in a field. And that's the main part of the field landing syllabus in preparation for Bronze Badge cross-country endorsement. I'm also going to talk about what to do once you're down, threat and error management, and have a quick chat about how we train for it in the air and a couple of my very own top tips. I've landed in quite a few fields. Yeah, might as well use some experience. Bit of a public health warning to that extent. It does contain several pictures of a DG in a field. Some viewers may find this distressing. So threat and error management for field landing. Couple of things, unsuitable field selection. So we're going to look at what to look out for, what to avoid, the sort of stuff that's going to give you a bad day. Misidentification of the atmospherics. So we're thinking things like wind, slopes, that sort of stuff. Late field selection resulting in reduced suitable fields. So we're going to have a look at kind of brain power and when we're looking to pick fields and what we're thinking there. And obstacle avoidance, what to look for, power lines, trees, animals, anything else like that. So, a couple of assumptions before we get too dug in. The first is that this briefing has been given in advance of your first field landing and as part of the training for the cross-country endorsement. Here's a first top tip for you. Just land at a friendly gliding club if you can. Then an airfield, you might need to call them on the radio. There's plenty in the south of England. Mark them on your map if your route takes them near them. It's just a lot easier than landing in a field. We're also going to assume that you're not flying a turbo. All right. Now, if you do have a means of propulsion, the threat and error management changes slightly, but the principles of this lecture are the same. So, why do gliders land in fields? I spent an awful lot of time putting animations on this, and they haven't come through, but never mind. First thing, health reasons: nausea, dehydration, need to the toilet. If it's a health reason why you're thinking about airfield landing, plan before you become so incapacitated to be able to fly the aeroplane. Dehydration is the one that gets you during the summer. You've been scraping around on a low blue day, hacking around for hours, you haven't had time to drink, and then all of a sudden you start noticing the symptoms. Could be lost. Normally what happens here is local soaring, scratching away in a broken thermal, you get blown downwind, you lose the bubble, and you have a really bad time because all of a sudden you can't see the airfield, and it kind of escalates pretty quickly. Field landing may well be a suitable course of action. Or weather. Wind stops, bit of exuberance on final glide, or in this particular instance on the far right hand side, spread out. That was quite good fun until the day changed, and yeah, guys, I was fine with landing back at Bicester. I pushed on, none of those clouds were working. Don't. So successful field landing really starts with good preparation. All right. It's not just when you're at the airfield. You can prepare for your field landings by looking at fields when you're on the ground. You're not looking for the field, but start to observe what's been planted in your locale. Landable fields do change. All right. Look at what the fields are doing. Look at what surfaces are, what the crops are, what they actually look like. You can take a good proportion of that you see when you're out and about into the air with you. Crew, who are you going to call if you have a land out? Who's going to come and get you? Trailer, Is it packed, loaded appropriately? Keys, de-rigging tools, trestles, they always get forgotten. Is it ready? Is it going to be easy for me to come grab the trailer and come and fetch you? Car, leave your keys behind. Is it insured for other people, or is someone else going to have to come and get you if you've not got a tow bar? Land out vouchers. Some clubs have got vouchers that entitle funds to free flights on the member's account upon redemption. They can be a really, really handy tool. Some clubs do them, some don't. If you've got them, it's worth having a couple in your back pocket just in case. And a land out bag. You might be waiting a little while for a crew, 3-4 hours. We'll talk about this a bit more at the end. So you're out on cross country. When should you really be thinking about fields? Now, this is a British standard day, 4,000 feet cloud base. You're up at the tops. I'm thinking kind of in terms of what the terrain ahead looks like, and is my route going across unlandable terrain? Do I need to kind of think about this? By unlandable terrain, forests, water, hills, that kind of thing. Thinking about fields is on my radar, but it's only occupying about 10% of my capacity. I'm thinking about it, but I'm not actively selecting fields as potential land out options. Once we get lower, down to 2,000 to 3,000 feet, now I'm really looking for suitable fields around and ahead of me. I'm being much more proactive about looking for a suitable option, because if I miss that climb, I'm going to be down in the weeds. All right, down 1,000 to 2,000 feet, I've got a field picked. I'm thinking about a circuit. 60% of my capacity is going into planning the circuit, approach and landing. The outstanding balance going to flying the aeroplane. And depending on, if you're up at 2,000 feet, you might just be trying to salvage that last little bubble. All right. If in doubt, plan early. All right, think early, think ahead of the aeroplane. We'll talk about that more in a second. So field selection, it's pretty easy. Just remember mnemonics, 7 S's. We're going to dig into these points in a bit more detail, but at a very high level for you. Size. If it's big enough to be an airfield, it probably is. All right, you're not going to find, it's unlikely actually that you're going to find a field the same size as your normal airfield. All right, but if in doubt, go for the biggest thing you can find. Then look at the surface. You'll have a good idea whether it's crop, pasture, or set aside. This is where what you've been looking at on the ground and your earlier observations and a bit of experience will have a good idea of what you're looking at. Structures, thinking of structures in and around the field. So elevated cables, not just high tension power lines, the big ones that you see all over the place, but things like telegraph cables. Electric fences, farm buildings, stables, byres, anything like that. Moving on, slope. There's a poll question floating around here somewhere, downhill into wind or uphill with a slight downwind component. We'll have a look at the poll answers later, assuming that it's actually worked. Slopes can be beneficial. All right, they'll slow you down pretty quickly. I can't see the poll results, so we'll just drift straight along past that one for the time being. And look at that at the end if I find it. Wind speed. Marked map will give you should give you a good idea of the wind speed and direction, or at least what the plan was. The forecasting is pretty good. It doesn't tend to change a huge amount. Tech is also a really, really, really helpful tool for this, as long as you understand what it's telling you. It's unusual for people to be going cross country now without a moving map. Your moving map will give you a wind arrow. Just make sure you understand what that wind arrow is doing in context of your track and potential fields. Right. Also, look for atmospherics on the ground. Smoke from bonfires, ripple on water. And here's another top tip for you. Most farms have got a windsock somewhere. Look around while you can, get a good idea of things that might give you an idea of where the what the wind's doing. Dave can't see a poll. Okay, let me see if I can do that. No, can't see it. Okay, I'll have a look at the poll later on. If it's not on anybody's screen, then ideally, slopes aren't ideal, but you're better off landing up a slope with a slight tailwind component. Couple of reasons for that. The main one being it's quite difficult to round out with the ground dropping away from you. You could go from being, a couple of feet off the ground, nicely rounding out, the speed bleeding off to all of a sudden having 6-8 feet drop straight down. Can't really see it. There's not much you can do about it. And you've also then got the downslope accelerating you as you go down. Generally speaking, it's better to land uphill and accept a slight tailwind component. Wind speed surroundings. What's around the field that could influence your field selection and landing? Thinking curl over from hills. Is the hill that you've picked on top of a hilltop or on top of a ridge top? Does happen, especially if you're flying around the Cotswold edge. What does the overshoot and undershoot look like? Is this field the only field? What's it surrounded by? Unless you particularly want to appear in the Daily Mail, it's probably best avoiding the field with a puppy farm at one end and a primary school at the other. And last thing, livestock, give it a miss. All right, we'll come on to that in a second. But yeah, just if there's anything in the field, probably not going to be your field. So a couple of top tips based off your field selection. I can't stress this enough, really. Plan early. All right, it's a very basic field selection. See a field from as many angles as possible. Sometimes the light will show up different things from different locations. There's a link at the end with a couple of pictures that really demonstrate this quite well. If you've got the time, have a look for access points, roads, anything like that, to save you walking all the way around the field looking for it. But only really do this if you've got the time and patience and capacity to be able to do it. If you're up nice and high, if you've left your field selection a little bit late, you're probably going to have to just go for a little walk, find your way out. All right. It's not wise to prioritise a field based on access, but it is something to be mindful of. And the last thing, perfect often doesn't exist. If it did, it'd be an airfield or a housing estate. So just think in terms of mitigations. You might be able to live without an overshoot if the undershoot is good, that sort of thing. So, size. When you're prioritising fields, size is a good thing to start with. The bigger, the better. This green field here has got enough around it to give you kind of an idea of what fields look like. And also, it gives you an idea of scale. So in this picture, you've got 3 industrial units. The big green field actually landed in a discus. That's my furthest I've ever landed from home, about 135K. But you can see you've got, housing estate just to the left of the main road. You've got the industrial estate to the south. You've got stuff that gives you an idea as to how big that airfield is. That field is. It was about 3,000 feet eye height. I think I grabbed that screenshot from. This one was also, I didn't know this at the time, conveniently located with a Chinese at one end and a McDonald's just around the corner. So happy days. At least the wait wasn't too bad. Still a cool story, that one. Okay, here's an interesting one. This is Bicester. I did actually look for Booker originally, but they weren't flying that day. Now, the blue box on the left outlines the takeoff and landing area that was in use on the day. You can just see it slap bang in the middle of the blue box. Now, the yellow boxes show fields around the airfield that occupy the same area from the same height. Again, an eye height of about 3,000 feet here. This is for size only, not surface, and I've tried to block out as much of the underlying surface as possible because in real terms, a couple of these fields wouldn't have been landable because of the surface at the time. Now, remember to allow for an overshoot and undershoot, but it kind of gives you an idea. Big, huge field that you get to launch from. In theory, all these fields potentially would have been considered as landable options. So that's size dealt with. Surface. Broadly speaking, surfaces can be categorised into arable, pasture, and set aside. Arable could be anything: flat crops, barley, wheat, corn, peas, anything like that, or could be ridge and furrow. All right. Anyone want to guess what that crop is? It's pretty easy, this one. It's oilseed rape. That one's the glider killer. We'll look at that a little bit more on the next slide. So looking at surface, trying to identify if it's landable. Simply put, if you can find a stubble field, probably land in a stubble field. All right, they're pretty innocuous. They might be a little bit bumpy, but for the most part, you'll be okay. If you can't find a stubble field, things that can affect the decision making or things that can influence your decision making, colour and texture are the real giveaways. All right. The picture down on the bottom right hand side, that's a pea field. Note how you can see the underlying surface, which is brown. Now, if there's texture or multiple colours to it, think why. A messy or a knotted look to a field is a pretty bad sign. That field there, if you can see brown and green all the way through, that's going to be a pretty light crop. All right, it's probably going to be reasonably landable. So yeah, green, brown, probably okay. Again, top left-hand side, probably okay. Look for furrows, they'll line up with the wheelings. Always try and land along your furrows and wheelings if you can. All right. Beige, so the one just on the bottom row in the middle, that's probably a standing crop. all right, it's very not ideal, and this can be a really big problem sort of late July, early August before the harvest starts, all right? Especially down in the south of England, you'll see a lot of standing crop, and it can really, really, really limit your field landing options. It's why for your first cross countries, your silver distance, just for the space of 2 or 3 weeks, probably worth giving it a miss in the middle of summer, just because the landables aren't really there. Light green, so the one top row, second from the right, could be pasture, could be a developed crop or silage, something like that. Again, this one you can see it's in the middle of harvest. You've got the dark green area, the light green area. You know from the fact that it's been harvested, this lighter green area is probably pretty landable. Yellow, the middle one at the top, this is going to give you an absolutely horrible day. From some angles, especially when the petals have dropped, it might not look yellow. The only clue that you'll have is a really uneven, knotted looking surface. Yep, oilseed rape grows to about 6-7 feet tall. Oilseed rape sticks are like tree trunks, and they will cause serious damage and probably quite a bit of hurt. So just don't go anywhere near it. It is never, ever a good option for a landing. Then lastly, top right hand side, brown beige stubble. It's normally okay. Land along it if you can, rather than across them. It can be quite deep to tell how wheeling is. Potato furrows could be up to 1/2 foot deep, and you're going to hit that for about 40 miles an hour when you touch down. That's going to rattle your fillings out at best. So kind of have a look from that field from as many different angles as you can and build up that picture in your mind whilst you're still trying to avoid landing in a field. Okay. Pasture fields. Pasture fields are normally okay if they're free of animals, but it's also pretty unusual to find a pasture field on its own. That said, for ease of land management, pasture fields can sometimes be segregated into much smaller much smaller parcels to allow for efficient grazing. They do this using electric fences, and we'll look at those on the next slide. Just avoid anything with livestock in it if you can. Like it says on the screen, their cows are inquisitive. A cow on its own is normally a bull. That's going to give you a really, really bad day. You'd be chased out of the field by a really angry, I don't know, 1 ton lump of meat. Not much fun for anyone. Sheep are stupid. They don't get out of the way. They weigh about 40 kilos. Sheep, not good. Horses are expensive, inquisitive, easily spooked, and their owners are even worse. For the most part, some of them are all right, but they ain't going to thank you if you spook the horses and they then have an accident, which they will, because they always do. Horses are a nightmare. This particular field, there were actually, believe it or not, there were no cows in that field when I landed. The farmer was in a field next door, opened the gate, and then saw me by the time the cows had already come in. I was in the middle of de-rigging. Fun times that was. Lastly, set aside. I think this one was probably set aside. Set aside to fields that haven't had crops in them. They're just left because the farmers used to get EU subsidies for them. This one in particular was a bit bumpy, but plenty large enough. I think it had a crop in it at the start of the year. This picture was taken in early September. Note in this one, you've got light brown, light green stubble. It looked okay from a lot of different angles, and there wasn't much evidence of undulations or ruts or anything like that. In reality, it was a little bit bumpy, but it was absolutely fine. But this is the sort of thing as well that you'll see just kind of from being out and about on the ground, looking at what fields might look like, looking at things that are going to give you a clue that you can take into the air. Structures. The biggest thing to be aware of, and the one that catches people out, is power lines. All right, it might be possible to see them, but you've got to think where the cables are going to be lying. It's not normally the high tension ones that get people, the ones on the top right hand side. They're really, really easy to see. They're normally marked by shadows, changes in the crop surface, because they are never farmed in the middle. You can't get a tractor in the middle, so you'll see big squares on the ground. Just look at their orientation, work out where those cables are going. Telegraph poles, just to the left of there, these can be really hard to see from the air, and invariably they're hidden in tree lines and hedges. And the fact that they're hidden in tree lines and hedges means they're probably going to be on your approach. So look for shadows, all right? Look for them casting shadows, think where they might be. You'll also never see one. You need to see 3 or 4 just to figure out what the line is. They're the biggest threat on approach by far. All right? Lastly, fences. Shadows and changes in colour give these away, especially in a pasture field that's been segregated up. Now, electric fences are almost impossible to see from the air. Some of the plastic frangible ones will probably fall over if you go through one. These dug-ins won't, but you'll probably see the shadows from them. But again, you'll be able to work out, roughly speaking, where they lie. You'd be pretty unlucky to kind of hit something like that, but it's something that you've got to have in the forefront of your mind if you think the field's been segregated. Last thing, farm strips. Farm strips can be really handy, but there's a couple of caveats to using them. First things first, length generally isn't a problem, but most farm strips are designed for light aircraft with much smaller wingspans than your average glider. This becomes a bit of an issue when there's crop either side of the field. So in the first picture on the left-hand side, you can see the farm strip running down the middle. You can see the crop on either side. That crop, to me, in this picture looks reasonably developed. It's probably not ideal, really. And the last thing you want, having planned a really, really good, really, really safe circuit, is for a vicious ground loop caused by a wingtip catching in the standing crop on either side. The other thing to bear in mind as well, if you're in a farm strip or considering a farm strip, if you land and stop slap bang in the middle of the farm strip, the farmer's gone out flying, he's going to be really upset if he then can't get back on his strip, and you might have quite a long pull to get the glider clear. All right. Second picture, the one on the right-hand side, that's Alkay's farm strip near Oxford, and by comparison to the one next door, looks pretty good. Grass fields are on either side. So if you look at it from left to right, you've got the dark green area. Again, looks pretty landable. I know there's horses down at the other end, which you might want to be aware of, but looks like probably a better option. The one to the left is at Waddesdon. It's only about 10k away. Some farm strips can be really difficult to spot from the air, though, so don't rely on it just because you can see it on your UD. It might be really difficult to find on the ground. So you've done the planning, you've got everything together, you're in a good place, and you've binned it, committed to an off-field landing. First things first, fly a normal circuit as much as you can. In this respect, just treat it like any other landing on an airfield. Think height, distance, and angle, and do bear in mind that it's unlikely that high key and low key will be within the kind of landing area like you might find back at your home base. Your altimeter is also not going to be much use, especially if you set it to 0 before you took off. All right, so you can't really rely on that. You've got to go back to what we taught you right back at the very start, which is height, distance, and angle. And to that point, speed is life. All right, you're going to have an idea of wind speed, but be really, really alert to things like wind shear, wind gradient. Be very alert to your speed beating off. Set a suitable speed and stick to it. All right, really increase the frequency of monitoring that airspeed. Remember the effect that the air brakes have on speed as well. Also, if you're landing out because you've been rained on, don't forget to carry extra speed. All right. Think options. Don't risk a turn-in bubble at low key. When you've committed to landing in a field, admit defeat. All right. You might lose sight of the field. You might be drifted away. You might make things worse for yourself. It's just not worth it. All right. The chances of you ending up in sort of quite a bad place, having risked a 360-degree turn in half a knot at 400 feet to save a flight, really, really high. Don't do it. It's not a good thing, not a good, sensible, pragmatic thing to do. Keep your options open. Have a backup plan right down to the final turn if you can. Now, that backup plan might be an undershoot field, might be an overshoot field, might be a field to the left or to the right. Just have that plan in mind. Leave yourself a little bit of space, leave yourself some options, and kind of think in terms of what if, what if, what if, what if, what if. Stay ahead of the aircraft as well. This is going to sound really obvious, but put the gear down early. If you've got it, dump water. Plan your circuit and approach to avoid overflying people or animals. All right, especially put your gear down early. Yeah, don't land wheels up in a field because we're going to be asking an awful lot of questions. So you got it down safe. Field landings can be really stressful. All right, you could have been hacking away for hours. You're going to be pretty discharged. Just take a second, get your breath back, compose your thoughts. Check out, are you okay? Is the glider okay? Gear doors and skids are normally the first victims in a field landing. They come off all the time. They're kind of almost designed to do that, really. This picture here, I think it was a Badger set or something like that, and the glider, without a word of a lie, is exactly where it stops. I wouldn't have seen that from the ground. It was about half a foot deep, would probably have had my head through the canopy and the undercarriage smashed up. All right, so you might have got away with a perfect landing, then what's happened? I couldn't see it from the cockpit, not much you can do about it, but look around, make sure you're all right, compose your thoughts. Confirm your location, make sure you know where you are. If you're near an airport or if you were talking to an airport before you landed in the field, just give them a quick call if you've got the ability to do so. Call your retrieve crew, launch point, and let them know they're down safe. Please make sure the airfield know that you're down safe. All right, it has happened before where pilots running his crew have hitched up a trailer and disappeared. At the end of the day, the duty instructor's having a look through the log files, and all of a sudden he realises he's got an aircraft unaccounted for. When it turns out that aircraft had landed hours ago and his crew's already with him in a field. So let people know what's happened, what's going on. Secure the aircraft, turn the power off, remove any valuables, PDA, handheld radio if you've got one, and then go and find the farmer. All right, we'll talk about that in a second, but it's really, really important for the sport that you find the farmer and just kind of let them know what's going on. And then chill out, read your book, find the pub, but stay local. All right, no crew wants to have driven 2 hours for then be sat around 20 minutes, half an hour while you gather yourself up from the nearest pub and deposit yourself back at the field. I'm going to apologise now to any farmers that are watching because I couldn't find any other pictures. The farmer, look, most farmers are okay. It's pretty unusual to get a bad one, but they are out there. Unfortunately, other sporting agencies do give glider pilots a bit of a bad name. Ultimately, you've turned up unannounced on his property. You're now an ambassador for the sport. Congratulations. Be polite, friendly, apologetic, explain how there's no damage, what you need to do to get the glider back, offer flights rather than money, pretend you're the farmer. All right, you've just rocked up unannounced on his land and potentially disturbed his quiet Sunday afternoon. If you get a bad one, they normally try and claim crop damage. Explain it'll be handled by insurance. Have a look at the BGA notes at the end because they've written a really, really handy guide on this. If you can't find the farmer, and it does happen. I've had it happen to me once. I landed out Sunday afternoon, couldn't find the farmer anywhere. Tried 3 different farms, then my crew turned up. Leave no trace. All right. Close every single gate, leave everything how you left it, and don't damage anything. All right. Again, you're an ambassador for the sport. Don't leave your litter lying around. Don't leave gates wide open. Don't try and disturb anything. You know, just have a little bit of common sense and think, what would you want to happen if you just landed out on your own farm? So the retrieve. By the main road, make sure you've got phone signal. All right, you could be by the main road, not have a signal, then your crew's batting around all over the place, can't find you. It's just a bit hacking around. Find somewhere where you've got signal and wait it out. It's a lot easier these days than it was sort of 10 years ago. Again, be vaguely familiar with the country code. Most of it applies to a glider pilot. Close the gates. Yeah, just a bit of common sense, really. Leave no trace. Is an aerotow retrieve likely or possible? Now, an aerotow retrieve from a proper airfield is pretty much a non-event. There's a little bit more to it than that, but really it's pretty easy. Field retrieves can be A-level difficult. If in doubt, just get roaded out. Picture on the right, field retrieve, note the presence of water, trees relative to the height. It's normally a short rope for a field retrieve as well, which increases sensitivity and makes being down the back harder. I'm not naming names. That was 2 incredibly experienced guys. That's not the sort of retrieve that you would ever want for your first field retrieve. But it was also, yeah, big lumpy pawnee, short rope, 2 pilots, pretty safe that, but probably not for your first time. So that's kind of the basics of field landings. Some top tips for you. Preparation is the key, and it does start really before you get in the aeroplane and go flying. I mentioned land-out kit at the start. My land-out kit's got a USB battery charger and cable because I've had a phone go flat on a retrieve. It happens. Gilet or body warmer, again, might be nice and warm when you take off, but it might be dark by the time the crew get to you. Face mask at the minute, make sure you've got one, especially given the world that we live in at the minute. And a high-vis jacket. I've landed out on airfields before, only to be shouted at because I was trudging across the tower and didn't have a high-vis on me. Some people take books, magazines. You don't need to take the kitchen sink, but you might as well prepare for a comfortable wait. All right. There's also no cross-country pilots that have never landed out. All right. Everyone from the top guys right down to the bottom have ended up in the field at some point in time. There's a pretty good argument to say if you haven't landed out, you've probably not pushed hard enough at some point. Everyone's got a good land out story, and I'd love to see a couple more in the chat window. Use technology. Make sure you've got a good mapping app on your phone that's up to date. Google Maps, what 3 words? William Verrill's touched on this already. What 3 words is really, really helpful. You can mark exactly where the field is, and even old people can use that technology. It makes life so much easier. Most PDAs have got a landables option. My OD shows me height required to get to a landable airfield. Other systems have got similar features. Use it, all right? Try and make your life as easy as possible. Other gliders in fields can be really useful, but bear in mind there might be parts in a different direction to which they landed. So just because you can see two gliders pointing in the same direction, that doesn't necessarily mean they landed, came to a stop, glider pilot got out and went to find the crew. They might have turned one around, pushed it back. They might be, they may well have just moved the aeroplane. Sometimes I've seen this before. They might both have ground looped. All right, so have a look at the atmospherics. Don't necessarily assume that because you've got a glider pointing in one direction, that's the way you've got to land. Last thing, if you've landed out in a club glider, we're going to want it back. All right. It's no excuse for not having a crew, but the chance of you being left in the field overnight, I mean, they're pretty slim at the best of times, but if you've done it in the club hot ship, someone's going to come and fetch you. The only issue, if someone turns up to come and fetch a club glider and 5 people are in the car, sorry, you're just going to have to get a bus home. They might drop you at the bus stop. All right. So the air exercise, we normally do most of the field landing in a motor glider, but we can talk about things like suitable fields, topography, kind of clues what field surfaces. We can do that on most trips, all right? And if you're at the stage where you're coming up ready for field landings, your instructor might well start asking you questions and get you thinking about doing it. Normally field landings, we'll do them over a couple of different flights on a couple of different days to different areas, just to give you a little bit of variety. What we're looking for is a safely flown, well-planned circuit. All right, we'll take it pretty much as a given that your approach control is adequate. We've also got to be pretty mindful of Rule 5. Final glide, field selection on final glide. This is the one that gets you, and it's the one that's worth practicing in the aeroplane, just so you see what it looks like because it creeps up on you. You set off on final glide, it looks like you're going to make it. You know, you sat nicely above, but it doesn't quite work out, but you keep going because you're getting close to home and you're still on glide. And then you start falling off a little bit more, and before you know it, you're down at 1,000 feet, 5 miles to run, 60 knots, and absolutely nothing in the tank. There's a couple of really good mitigations to this, all right? Just have a look around at the fields before you go. Look at where you're going to be coming back in from and think, where are my options? What do the landables look like? Do I need to take this into account on the way back in? You've got plenty of time, especially if you're at a competition waiting before the start line to open, just thinking, what if my final glide doesn't work out? Where are my options? There's also a couple of airfields. Bista's a good example, I think, the last, and Booker as well for that matter. The last couple of K, going back to the airfield, there's very little by way of unlandable airfields, so you should probably really thinking about that when you're thinking to plan your final glide. Here's the couple of resources as well for your own further reading for afterwards. You've got BJ resources, including Ted Lysikowski videos. These are brilliant. They're really, really good. They're really, really well put together, and they'll occupy a good amount of your time. They're really in depth, a lot more so than this is. This is quite a general overview. Fieldselection.co.uk, that's a good website. Shows you what fields look like at different points of the year. Have a look at it. It was originally set up by Adrian Hatton, who's a glider pilot and farmer up in Newark, Retford, kind of way, that sort of direction. So it's got a bit of a northern spin to it, but give you an idea kind of just what to look for and what crops look like on the ground. And lastly, get what 3 words. You know, it's really, really helpful, especially for marking field entrances and everything else. That's it. All right, that's pretty much an overview of field selection, how to plan safely, get yourself into a field. And then what to do afterwards. Let me just turn the Q&A session on. There we go. Q&A's been enabled, so put your questions in. Let's see what we got. And please, someone stick some land out stories in the chat because they're good fun to talk about. No one's mine. So that field, somewhere back in time, 135k away from home, I landed out. Was on a 300k. I couldn't have been much further away from home, to be honest. And it didn't work out. Got caught under a lump of spread out. Picked a great field, landed on, found the farmer. Been in the field for about 2 hours. My crew was about an hour away. And I was just snoozing under the wing and I heard a police car drive past. Not unusual, the A1 was at the bottom of the field. Car drove past, again, heard the siren stop. I thought, oh, this is interesting. Tootles off down to the bottom of the field, only to see a farmer walking, only to see the policeman walking back up the other way. So, is this your aeroplane? I'm a pilot. You've been here long? A couple of hours, why? We've had a report from someone driving down the A1 of a light aircraft crashing in a field around here with 7 people on board. I've been here about 2 hours and I haven't seen anything. Right, okay. Is it? And we turned, we looked up the hill. I'd landed on top of a hill, and one of the wings, being a glider, of course, was touching the ground. So it kind of looked a little bit to the innocent bystander like there potentially had been an aircraft accident. As the penny dropped between me and the policeman, the second of 2 police cars, 3 fire engines, and 7 ambulances appeared at the entrance to the field. My one regret about that field was it was before the days of camera phones, because I'd down out on that story. It was good fun. What do we got going on down here? Any questions coming in? Let's have a quick look. Q&A mode's been enabled. Let me see the question list. No Q&As. Perfect. Yeah, only ever been to other people's landhouse. Yeah, go on retrieves. Help your mates out, all right? If you've got to go and fetch somebody else out of a field, it automatically basically gives you the rights to say, hey, can you come and get me? You'll see kind of what's going through your pilot's mindset, what fields actually look like, and kind of think, actually, yeah, I can see why this was good. All right, it's a really good way of kind of just giving yourself that little bit more knowledge on field landings, actually seeing it done, and just being more prepared for the first time you've got to go and do it. Got 5 people typing, 4 people typing. Dave, you screwed up your rails and short farms that you're going to be landing downhill. Too late to change your approach. What do you do? Dave, I think we'd had a bit of a chat about this offline. It kind of depends on a number of factors. Downhill, can you drop it in early? You know, have you got a good overshoot? What was your overshoot and undershoot option? How steep a downhill is it? You know, if it was a downhill that was going to give you a really, really bad time, you'd probably picked it up earlier, which does beg the question why you were there in the first place. Ultimately, if it looks like you really, really have screwed up, save yourself. All right, don't worry about the aeroplane. If the field's too short, you're going to run out. Ground loop. All right, it's the safest thing to do. If you're coming in, you see a fence that you think you're going to go through, it's much easier to take a slightly heavier landing than it is to try and go through the fence. All right, the glider, insurance will sort it out. You know, you hurting yourself, don't do it if you can avoid it. All right. Last thing I'd say on that, Bob Hoover's got really good advice here. Fly the aircraft right to the scene of the crash. If it looks like you're going to have an accident, stay in control of it as much as you can. One thing I would say, though, is the chance of an accident occurring from a field landing, as long as you've prepared for it, as long as you've basically gone through what we're talking about here, so planning early, thinking ahead, all that sort of stuff, actually it's not a non-event, but it's pretty easy. What else have we got going on here? Fun retrieving other people. Wind direction is a major gotcha, particularly in the early days. It is, but use things around you. Use your PDA. Look on the ground for signs. And one thing I do with quite a lot of my students that are in that stage, and especially guys even that have done the first 50K, but not a lot after that. If you see, certainly me as an instructor sat in the back, if I see a bonfire or I see something like that or I notice something, I'll just ask the student, what can you see that will give you an idea of the wind direction? Now, some of them say the windsock on the airfield. But there's normally something around that will give you a bit of a clue, but it really helps, having a good marked map, understanding what the arrow is telling you on your PDA, making sure you're interpreting that properly as well, and kind of building up that spatial orientation of what the wind is doing. Red, I did have I intentionally ground loop before I hit the hedge, was unable to detect the slope from the air. Luckily, the glider was okay. Yeah, I mean, a ground loop, especially at lowish speeds, probably not going to hurt the aeroplane too much. You'll probably take a skid, wingtip or tail off. It's going to hurt an awful lot less than going through a hedge. All right, if you think you're going through a dry stone wall, your feet are going to go through first at landing speed, just take the ground loop. All right, I'd much rather have to hoover a load of bits of aeroplane than a load of bits of broken bones. On a slightly serious note, how do you control the nerves during the circuit? Practice, unfortunately, but really being comfortable in your own abilities and thinking ahead of the aeroplane. Ultimately, you can practice bits of field landings back at your home airfield with an instructor sat behind you, just having someone say, okay, well, I want you to land in this part of the airfield. All right. Nerves are one of those things, you find your own coping mechanisms, but the more you plan, the more you think about it, the more you look, actually the less reason you've got to be nervous, but it is a valid thing. Darren, I always stick surface wind at the top of the list. It gives you time to go downwind, find a better area, then you can line up with winds. Then you can line up with the wind on the next list. Yeah. I think the BGA pick out the major things are surface size and wind speed and direction. As long as you've got those three, you could probably make a reasonably good call as to that, as to whether a field is landable or not. I don't think we've got many more questions here. 43 people on tonight, which is a really nice show, so thank you very much for coming. If you've got any questions, do shoot them in an email to me, kind of grab me at the nearest flying club bar. And yeah, let's hope we can actually go out and do some cross-country flying soon. Thank you very much, everyone. This presentation will be available on YouTube afterwards. Thanks, guys. Have a good evening.